2 weeks ago, I rocked up to the Dirty Reiver on a bike using components from brands that most people in the event would have never heard of and probably wouldn't have even dreamt of using themselves. Light carbon frame, WheelTop group set and yo-yo wheels, to name just a few of the parts. And to top it all off, I was running a really controversial set of tyres. I decided to take Dylan Johnson's advice and completely abandon gravel tyres for this event, instead electing for some cross-country mountain bike tyres. And well, I have a lot of thoughts on just how well they rode. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about what worked and what didn't work for both my performance and my setup at this year's Dirty Reiver, and crucially what setup choices I'll be carrying forwards into future gravel races this year, including the Gralloch next weekend. And before we get started, clearly my risky gear strategy has paid off, as I managed to land the 5th fastest time on the day, clocking 6 hours and 46 minutes. So before getting into the bike, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about my strategy and pacing for the event. Now, leading up to the event, my training was super endurance focused, really aiming to up my volume without too much intensity. So I was spending a vast amount of my training time doing zone 2 training, with at times even hitting over 20-hour weeks of training, which when you're trying to juggle that alongside a full-time job, yeah, was pretty tiring, but I think it was all worth it. In the first 2 hours of the event, I only actually had to average around 260 watts. But that doesn't really tell the story of what was going on there. There were constant surges and complete freewheeling descents, giving me a normalised power of 300 watts. And whilst 300 watts for 2 hours sounds pretty difficult, it's not particularly out of the realms of possibility for most competitive cyclists. However, that first 2 hours aren't particularly decisive. The majority of us going for a time was still in a nice large group at the 2 hour mark, with only 3 riders up the road ahead, and they were on another level. We're never going to see them again. But after this point, that's when this ride starts to become extremely attritional, with riders dropping off one by one, either with a mechanical or just because their legs have fallen off. And this is where I knew as long as I didn't have a mechanical, I would really come into my own. And actually around 4.5, knocking on 5 hours in, it was just me and Ed Laverack left from our group, with 2 guys we were trying to chase back onto just up ahead. Unfortunately, at this point, Ed had his puncture, as you all saw in my video the other weekend, but I just kept riding. And this is the bit of every gravel event I bizarrely look forward to, because I know I can just sit at a nice steady power output and slowly reel people in one by one. And yeah, it's just about not going too deep at the start, knowing that in gravel, drafting, whilst important, is nowhere near as mission critical as on the road. And actually, because the speeds aren't crazy high, you can chase people back solo later on in the day. Amongst all of this, I was trying to really nail my fueling strategy. As I explained in my preview video, I went into the event with 300 grams of carbs in the form of just table sugar and a bit of salt in my Camelback, and got through all of it. I also brought 5 22-gram gels with me, so that's around another 110 grams of carbs. And I did actually bring a load of jelly babies in a plastic bag, but I actually didn't even touch these, and just grabbed a handful of like Cliff blocks, which are basically just chewy sweets, at the final aid station. All in, I think I calculated I probably had between 450 and 500 grams of carbs on the day, which was only around 70 grams an hour, but I came in pretty topped up on my glycogen stores. And yeah, I felt strong right until that finish line. Like I could keep putting out over 300 watts up every steep uphill section and kept the chain tight on the flats and the downhills. And I got so close to catching 4th place as well. I was only about a minute behind them by the finish. I reckon if the event was another 20 kilometers longer, I'd have definitely had them. And from the amount of guys I spoke to afterwards who said their legs fell off at the sort of 100-kilometer mark, which is kind of around the distance of a standard gravel race here in the UK. For events this long, it's not really about who's got the highest FTP. It's all about your fatigue resistance. It's can you do 80% of your FTP after 5 hours of hard riding, including loads of surges, and not completely crack. And I think out of every kind of discipline in cycling, if you put the population on a bell curve, this is the type of thing I rank the highest at. And whilst I think most of my improvement did come from my physical fitness this year, you can't ignore the bike I was on. And I think it worked brilliant. And I'm so happy that I sort of took a bit of a gamble to go with some of these unknowns in my setup and just give them a go and roll the dice really. In this section of the video, I'm going to break down one by one each component choice I made and how well it worked out for me, because there were some things that I do think I could improve on next time. So the first thing I want to talk about is the frame I've been running. This is a light carbon LCG 017-Pro. I'll leave them linked in the description below, but it's basically Light Carbon's racing gravel frame. And now, whilst it's not feathery light, it has a really good geometry that's racy, but not super low stack, and a very appropriate setup for gravel. And I've paired it with a set of integrated 38 wide, 120mm long handlebars. And yeah, I found that fit to be spot on for the duration. Normally I would run it with a 0 offset seat post, but I'll talk more about the seat post later on. And one thing I love about this frame is just how much tyre clearance I get. I could fit my mountain bike tyres with absolute ease and not have to worry even if it was going to be wet on the day. But there was one thing I didn't really like with this frame, and there's not much chainring clearance. And I know there's a kind of a physical incompatibility here. If you want more tyre clearance, you've got to have your chainstays out wider, which means you've not got as much chainring clearance. And to maintain a decent chainline at the rear, I was using this offset chainring, which was very, very close to the frame, to the point where under flex, it definitely was rubbing a bit, and there is a little bit of scuffing on the frame's paint underneath now. So I guess this is just a problem that a lot of gravel frame manufacturers are going to have to really think deeply about, because some frames are starting to support bigger chain rings and things like there's the dub wide axle standard. However, that's moving your chain line even further outboard, which means when you're in the bigger sprockets towards the middle of your cassette, yeah, your chain line's not going to be as efficient. And actually, for me, the points where I'm putting the most power down, I am probably in the easier gears going up climbs. So I'm going to have to ditch this offset Wuezi Aero chainring in favour of one of their normal inline rings, which means I'm going to get 3mm extra chain clearance, which should be enough to make it a little bit safer and reduce the risk of me writing off my frame. And also, I got a few comments saying, like, why do you need a 4410 on a gravel bike? You know, you're not going to be going fast enough to spin that out. But the reason is that you don't want to use your 4410. Like, that is the bailout gear if people are absolutely sending it on a descent and you just need to put some watts down. A 10-tooth sprocket is really not very efficient, and ideally you want to stay well away from that sprocket. If you watch quite a lot of stuff on YouTube, you'll see when people have done tests, by far the most important thing for pedaling efficiency is having the big chain rings. It's way more significant than a good chain line, a clean chain, a wax chain, any of that. Going round a tighter radius makes your chain less efficient. Okay, enough nerding out of a chain efficiency. The next big change I've made on this gravel build that I'd never done before actually is swapping to 165 cranks. And now I know I am completely just chasing all the latest trends on this build, but I have genuinely found, even as a 1m87 rider, that they are brilliant for the sort of riding I've been doing on this bike. Now, I probably wouldn't choose these cranks on a hill climb bike where I'm going to be putting out big torquey efforts out of a saddle, but for gravel racing, I think that the short cranks are actually really good. The sort of courses that we race on here in the UK, like at the Gralloch or the Grey & Cymru or at the Dirty Reiver, the gradients never particularly get that steep. So you're pretty much spinning all day if you want to be, especially with the sort of gearing we've got on gravel bikes these days. And now, whilst they're not going to be for everyone, for me and my physiology, I think they've actually been a huge improvement. I've actually ordered myself 165 cranks for my road bike as well now, because I'm just enjoying them so much. Next up, and this is the big one, is the groups that I was running. As I said in my preview, I am running WheelTop GEX, which is a very unorthodox choice and definitely didn't get the best reviews when it first came out. And whilst there are a lot of quirks with getting it set up, I'm going to save them for the full review. I found actual performance on the day to be spot on. I didn't have a single moment where the shifting let me down, and the braking and hoods comfort was brilliant. I'm pretty certain WheelTop designed this group set before SRAM released their E1 style hoods, so I don't even think you can claim they copied the SRAM style, but it's got that same longer lever body with a less pronounced lump at the top like the old style SRAM had, which I found really uncomfortable. and it has a really nice flat transition from the drops, which means it's super comfortable for long rides. The one thing that wasn't great is the hood rubbers are a bit loose and flappy, but to be honest with you, that's not really a performance thing. I know I keep saying everything's super important, but one of the most influential choices I made, I think, on this day was running my Redshift seat post. Now, I know these are not cheap and these are not light. I think it adds around 400 grams versus my standard carbon seat post, but it makes a world of difference in comfort, especially when you're 6 hours deep on a gravel event like this. You know, all of them little vibrations add up to your fatigue, and whether that be purely your ability to produce power or a comfort-based thing, you know, can you hold that position deep into the event when you're tired? And I think, honestly, it was one of the biggest performance improvements, along with my tyres, from the event last year. Way more significant than running a slightly more aggressive or slightly more aero frame set. The only thing that isn't ideal, but it's more of a personal thing for me, is the fact that because of the way the sort of parallelogram suspension mechanism works, it means I've got a slightly more setback seat post than I would like. If you've seen any of my other bike builds, you'll know I am one for slamming my saddle forward on a zero offset post, as I just like to be as far forward over the BB as possible. I don't know why, but I find I can produce way more power in that position. But them drawbacks aside, I think it was a huge positive shift in my setup, and I'm really glad I ran it. And I think that's pretty much all of the gear choices I've made, except for the big one. And this is the one, obviously, I've teased in the title of the video, and that was my tyre choice. Until this point, I have purely been running gravel tyres for gravel. As you would expect, really, you know, that's what they're made for. But obviously the trend, especially out in the US, as promoted by Dylan Johnson, is to try XC mountain bike tyres, because for some inexplicable reason, they are supposedly faster. And I know this is all to do with the fact that they're a larger volume tyre, so they can get away with a thinner casing, meaning they've got a reduced rolling resistance without compromising puncture protection. But I was still super skeptical. Last year, I rode on Panaracer X1 Gravel Kings, which I absolutely tore to shreds at the Gralloch later in the year. And then for the Grey and Cymru, I was riding G1 Bites in a 45mm as well. So I decided, you know what, of any time to test them, the Dirty Reiver is the one. Most people say that these mountain bike tyres are faster off-road, but quite a bit slower when you hit the tarmac. The Dirty Reiver's 95% or more gravel, so let's run them there. And at the end of the day, it's not a race. If it all goes wrong, who cares? But I have to say, ever since trying them for the first few times, just shakeout rides on the rig, checking it's all working before the event, they just felt so smooth and so fast. Even on like the road sections riding into climbs, they just didn't have that sluggish drag that some gravel tyres have. And yeah, I was absolutely loving them. Getting the calipers out on my 27mm internal rims, these were blowing up to 53mm, which, as I said before, fit perfectly in the frame with reasonably tight but not concerning clearance. And I'd set them up with 23 psi in the front and 24 in the rear, about 1 or 2 psi more than what Silca recommends, because I still have that stupid thing in my head where I always get nervous to go quite as low as the pressure calculators run. But what these big high volume tyres allow you to do at these low pressures is they deform over all the little lumps and bumps and allow them to run even smoother. And apparently that massively improves their rolling resistance. It was just so smooth, and at no point on the gravel did I feel like I didn't have enough speed to keep up with the other fast riders around me. I was definitely only ever limited by my fitness or my confidence on the descents. In my actual event video, a few of you pointed out that maybe their grip not being brilliant on the loose stuff was the reason I was struggling on the descents. But to be quite frank with you, I don't think it was. I'm pretty certain that was all to do with the fact that I am kind of useless at these descents, and I just don't have the confidence to absolutely rail it round corners sat millimetres off the wheel in front, and I was always leaving a bit of a safety buffer. And part of the reason for that is on these gravel roads, there's often these massive craters, sort of pothole style, in the tracks where you're riding, and which riders will either bunny hop, but if you plough straight into them, you know, that could be a really serious crash, especially when you're doing 30+ kilometres an hour. And beyond just a rolling resistance benefit, for an event this long, having a nice high volume tyre that absorbs some of the vibrations and lumps and bumps of the road has a massive benefit on comfort as well. And if you're uncomfortable deep in these events, you're not going to be holding as good of a position, so you'll be less aero. And to be honest with you, you'll probably start to get a bit demoralised and your power output will drop as a result of it. Compared to the year before where I was so achy and stiff and constantly stretching my back out, here, I didn't particularly feel any worse than after a long, hard road ride, which is really testament to just how much work both the tyres and seat posts were putting in. I am absolutely over the moon with that choice, and they will definitely both be staying on my bike for the Gralloch next weekend. If you have managed to stick around with me rambling on about gear for this long, I assume you want to hear what's happening next on the channel. And next weekend, I'm going to be shooting off back up north, back up to Scotland and taking part in the Gralloch, which is the first of the 2 UK World Series rounds this year. Last year, it all went wrong with an absolute plethora of punctures. I punctured twice and spent about 20 minutes trying to fix them, absolutely obliterating my tyres in the process. There is something really ruthless about whatever the stones are around Galway Forest, and hopefully I'm not going to have that same fate this year. And even though I thought I was going to be taking the Redshift back off for the Gralloch, it was so successful at Dirty Reiver and I felt it had such an improvement on my performance that I am going to be taking that sort of 400 gram weight penalty of keeping that seat post on there. And I'm absolutely going to be trying these mountain bike tyres because I need to try something different after last year's gravel tyre disaster. Maybe these aren't going to be the solution, but you're going to have to check out my full race video that will hopefully be coming just after next weekend to see how it went. I am so excited to get back out properly racing on gravel again and see just how much I've improved on last year. And if you want to be one of the first to find out my result from the weekend, give me a follow on Strava and I will see you all in the next one.